brother or an uncle or someone else in the family that is the heir, they would be responsible for paying for her burial. Seem fair? Let's hope so. All right. That one's the easiest one for tonight. They get a little more complicated. Ketubot, Mishnah 2 from chapter 11.
A widow, whether her husband died after betrothal. How do you say that?
Betrothal.
Betrothal. Or after marriage, may sell her husband's estate without permission from a court.
Okay, this is one I'm sure that is going to cause a lot of controversy, especially among the real estate agents in the room. So, let me do our little timeline. As you all know, I love timelines. Just as a reminder, you have the betrothal, and then you have the wedding, right? So this is like getting engaged, which in the ancient world used to be a long time before the final part of the wedding. This is the giving of the ring and the harayat mekudeshet, the proclamation of the husband for marrying her. And this is the sheva brachot under the chuppah, the final act of the marriage. If she's only here and he dies, or she's here and he dies, and she wants to collect her ketubah, she can go and say to the real estate agent, I want to sell this field to pay for my ketubah. And the real estate agent says, okay. She doesn't have to go to the court. She doesn't need to get permission. She can take care of all of that arrangement by herself in order to cash out the land so that she is able to collect the ketubah. Because remember, the ketubah is a debt that is attached to his property.
And what happens if the heir say, you know what, we prefer to don't sell it and we'll give you the money for the ketubah, or part of the land, don't sell it.
So,
and the heirs have any word?
As always, compromise is best. But if there is sufficient resources for her for the ketubah to be collected from the land, technically it is her right to do it that way. Now, should she, if they're willing to say, look, we don't want you to sell this, we would rather you sold that, or we don't want you to sell this, I have a whole bunch of coins in my pocket already, ideally they would come to a compromise and it would be fine. But what the Mishnah is saying is she doesn't actually need their permission, because technically the ketubah is mortgaged by the land. And so therefore when she needs to collect it, she has the right to claim the land and to sell it for the ketubah's value. Now we're going to get to that valuation in the next two Mishnayot. How do you figure out how much the land is worth? But did you want a copy of that was probably today's class. That was from the Nitzavim Torah study. So if she wants to sell it, she has that right, because technically she already kind of owns it. It's because it's mortgaged to pay her ketubah. Now, why does it not matter whether it's before betrothal or after the wedding? It's because the ketubah is before anything, right? You agree to the ketubah before you do the betrothal. So the contract exists before they do the betrothal. So you've already got the debt, right? The debt continues the whole way through. So therefore, she has the right, no matter where it happens. Once they've agreed to it and done at least the betrothal, at least the engagement, it's her right to claim the ketubah. Make sense? Okay. Rabbi Shimon has a slightly different opinion.
Rabbi Shimon says, if her husband died after marriage, she may sell without permission from a court. But if after betrothal, she may not sell except with permission from a court, since she is not entitled to maintenance, and anyone who is not entitled to maintenance may not sell except with permission from a court.
Okay, so Rabbi Shimon looks at this a little differently. He says, wait a minute. If she was married, there'd already been the wedding and everything, then she has her choice between being supported, the maintenance, or collecting her ketubah right then, or collecting it later. And I understand you don't want to force her to have to come to the court every time she needs to sell a field in order to have enough money to buy food for herself, right? Because then how would she be able to live if she has to constantly go to the court and say, I petitioned the court to sell this field, the court has to have it here. That's crazy. But if she was only betrothed, then she doesn't actually get maintenance from his house. So why should she be allowed to just sell as the same way? Because selling for the ketubah, you do it once. Is it such a big problem to have to come to the court and get permission? You're only going to do this once. Maintenance, that would happen a lot. The ketubah is only a one-time thing. So therefore, come to the court and do it there. Now, I should point out, Rabbi Shimon loses, right? Because the debt is on the property, regardless of the maintenance issue. It's her right to collect on that debt in the way that she sees fit. And so ultimately, Rabbi Shimon loses this argument. But hopefully you can at least understand his logic.
He has a very point.
Okay, so again...
Because she became to be like a free rider.
What do you mean free rider? She was his wife.
No, but she didn't like really live with him, so she
okay. So if we're talking
all
here,
all the jobs and everything
right,
to produce, like she was passive, completely passive in economical production,
right?
Completely passive because she didn't marry, she didn't live with him, so she didn't was a part of the process of production of the family, and the land and everything.
But the ketubah says that in the case of his death, she has the right to this much money, which used to be more variable in the ancient world. Nowadays, it's more consistent. But in the ancient world, it was, her money. That was a contract. If you have a contract with the guy who's cutting down trees, and he doesn't finish the job, do you say, well, it's okay. You didn't do all of the stuff that was normally going to be done, so I don't really need to worry about the contract, or vice versa. He cuts down some of the trees for you, and then you die, God forbid, and your family says, yeah, but we didn't really have a relationship. You only did a few trees, so just wait and we'll deal with you later. If you mortgage the property to pay this debt, you have to pay it when it's called.
Rabbi, okay? She didn't receive any. She didn't have any damage in her potential for the next two because she's still a virgin. And still she can receive almost full price. So not really. Like I understand if she's a widow and she cannot receive the full price because she's already not a virgin. But in this case, she's still a virgin. Okay.
Compromise is compromise. Right. So compromise is always good. And if the family were to say to her, look, we don't have enough and the harvest is almost coming, let us finish the harvest and then we'll sell the land and do all of that, and she's agreeable to all of that, then as we say, hareze meshubach, that's wonderful, right? That's praiseworthy. They should always work together and come to a good agreement. But if the family and she don't get on well, it's her right to collect the debt. Am I saying that this would be the most beautiful human being on the face of the planet? I don't know. It depends on the circumstances. But she does have that right. And the rabbis wanted to make sure that women who were economically the most vulnerable in the society were able to collect when the debt was due. Now, again, that doesn't mean they couldn't postpone it willingly with cooperation and agreement with the family. But if you begin to say, just wait, then you begin to delay, and what is she supposed to do in the meantime? If she's trying to collect her ketubah, but the family says, well, if you're trying to collect your ketubah, then we don't have to pay you maintenance, right? Because you're clearly out of here. But we're not going to let you sell until the court agrees, and then the court gets tied up, or maybe it's Rosh Hashanah next week, and so the court's going to be tied up for months, with all of the holidays. It has to be, according to the rabbis, something that can be collected on time. And the same way, I believe that you would say for any other debt. Right? We know in the Torah that if you have a debt to a worker, you have to pay the worker that day. You can't say, come back tomorrow morning. Right? Because once the debt has been established, the debt has to be paid. Can you ask for permission and leniency and cooperation? Of course you can ask. But when it ends up in court, she has the right to collect.
Question. If she's considered a widow?
Yes, she would be considered a widow.
No matter she didn't...
Even though it didn't quite get there, yes.
Because she signed a contract or...
Right, because there was a formal engagement, right? Remember, engagement in Jewish law is more serious than in American custom, right? In America, engagement's like, who cares? But in Jewish law, once you're engaged, you're basically mostly married. You don't get the good stuff. You're not living together, you're not sleeping together and all of that. But if you sleep with someone else, it's adultery, right? It's not breaking the engagement. It's the same as if you were already married and you slept with someone else.
How long until they marry?
It depended in history, but for much of our history, this was about a year gap. Nowadays, it's about 20 minutes. we put the two pieces together very, very quick. Because as you can see, the feelings about, well, what is the real status of this between time? It's just not a good place to leave people hanging. So yeah, we do boom, boom, and then we're done. Question? Or wasn't sure if you wanted to say, okay. So we're on to 11.3. We're flying through. There's only 6 of these, so it's okay to ask questions. Next voluntary reader.
Okay. Let's see. A widow who sold her ketubah or part of it, or pledged her ketubah or part of it, or gave it away to someone else or part of it, may not sell her husband's property in order to receive the remainder of her ketubah, except with the permission of the court.
All right, so part 1, and this is a little bit unusual, is actually continuing Rabbi Shimon's position. So he's introducing the new topic, but since he's still the same speaker, he comes first, but this is technically still Rabbi Shimon, which means he's losing. But his position is, well, what happens if you have a wife who has already promised half of her ketubah to someone else? So her ketubah has already been impaired. It's already been reduced. Or maybe she's collected it in some other way already at this point. We talked about that in earlier times. So if she's already dented her ketubah, then you definitely need to let the court make a decision before she can sell. But the sages don't agree. Keep reading part 2.
But the sages say she may sell the land pledged for her ketubah, even in 4 or 5 installments. And meanwhile, she may sell of her husband's estate to provide for her maintenance without the permission of the court. And she writes, I sold the land to provide for my maintenance.
Okay, so yes, it is possible to do shenanigans, to be a little crooked in this while still being legal. So, imagine, where's my list?
Yeah, because maintenance never say what is the level of maintenance.
Well,
the medical maintenance is very high maintenance.
We went over that before, the minimum they have to give her.
Yes, okay, so okay, so imagine, all right, there's your house. Okay. All right, that's the house. And she's, living up here now that he's dead. And she's, and her ketubah, she has already sold this, and this, and this, and this to pay for her ketubah. And so she's already collected 4/5, let's imagine, of her ketubah. But then she stops and says, but I want to keep living here for a while. So she's already got 4/5 of her ketubah.
1/4. 1/4.
And then she wants to stay longer, but there's not really enough money to pay for her food and for everything else. So she sells this, right? This is for maintenance. And then she sells another for maintenance. And another year later, she sells another for maintenance, right? Technically, it is her right to eat through the property, even having already collected 4/5. And then at the very end, she could sell the last piece for the rest of her ketubah and go away. Right, so technically, this is her right, because she is allowed to collect her maintenance from the property, and she is allowed to collect her ketubah from the land. When you get married, your wife has a lien against all of your property. Yeah.
Were there many marriages at that time with all those conditions?
Yeah.
But this is normal, right? Now, it's not normal for the woman to just hang around having already sold 4/5 and then eating the rest of the land. Right? That would be unusual. And I'm sure that the heirs would find a way to convince her to move out early. They would either give her.
Always happen accidents.
I'm thinking more of a big cash settlement.
Okay.
You may be thinking of, oops, she fell in front of the wagon. But I'm thinking they would say, look, why don't you find a nice man, go get married, you'll get the rest of your ketubah, and we'll even give you something extra. Right? And then you got him to maintain you and a little bonus and your ketubah. It's good. Get out of here. So that would have been a possibility. But the rabbis are saying is that technically this is her right. Because she has a debt against all of this property, she can do with it as she needs to do. And the rabbis were very serious that a woman had to be protected by the ketubah system. Because if not, let's say she sold 4 parts of the ketubah, and now she sold a couple other pieces of the property for maintenance, and his brother, who's the heir, begins saying, well, I don't like the fact that she's selling off parts of the land that I'm supposed to be inheriting, right? So I'm going to go to the court and try and stop her. Well, that would mean then what? That she can't sell anymore, and she has to live off what was coming from the ketubah, even though her right is to be able to stay with the estate as long as she's collecting maintenance and doing her work, right? Why should he be allowed to stop her? Why does his wishes to have more of the land come to him? Why is that a stronger wish than her wish to stay on the land where she was married? Right? We tend to feel that maybe he has a bigger claim, but the ketubah establishes her claim first. And therefore she has the right to use the land as is necessary to satisfy that claim. And if you don't like that, don't get married. Right? Well, because remember, we talked about this way back at the beginning, but that was weeks ago. So I will repeat myself, and probably more than once before my life is over, I'll repeat myself. The rabbis were concerned that marriage was so economically disadvantageous for women that women wouldn't want to get married. That it was better to stay with your father and with your brothers and live in that house where you knew they would take care of you, where you knew someone would bury you. Right? Once you leave your house, you're now at the mercy of the husband's family. So why would you ever do that unless there was a guarantee that you would not be left poor, that you would not be just kicked out with nothing? And that guarantee was called the ketubah. And in order for that guarantee to be strong, it had to come as the top debt on the estate.
Couldn't they always just, if something were to happen, couldn't they just go back with their father or brother?
Not always available, right? I mean, if you were living in Israel, but your husband was going to be living in Cyprus, right? You can't just jump on a boat with nothing and sail home, right? Or even more, if husband was going on a trip to Morocco or to Yemen or some other distant area, or even just between the Galil and Jerusalem, it wasn't like it was next door.
Yeah, but then they'd have left the jurisdiction of the courts to have any of this stuff enforced.
Jewish courts, until the modern period of the Enlightenment, could enforce this no matter where it was.
Really?
Yeah, you show up in Egypt with a claim on a ketubah from Turkey, and the Egyptian courts would hear it. You go to Spain with a claim from Yemen, the Spanish judges would hear it in the Beit Din. Yeah, there was what we would call in modern American law full faith and credit among the different communities around the Jewish world. In fact, you find many.
Global community.
It was a global community and a global legal community and a global economic community as well. That was one of the reasons why Jews were at the beginning of establishing paper money, because Jews would write contracts that would say, this piece of paper is good for 500 gold coins because Shlomo, the wool merchant, is going to give me that next summer, when he gets the money for his wool at the sale. And then I take that piece of paper and I trade it to you for a horse. Now you can get the money from Shlomo, but then you can trade it to someone else, and it could keep going around and around and around because we all trusted that eventually the money from Shlomo would end up in whoever had the piece of papers, whoever's pocket had the piece of paper at the end. And that was the beginning of those credit sheets that established the idea that pieces of paper were valuable. They actually had worth because of the promise to fulfill whatever was on it, because we trusted each other, even if it was France versus Egypt. The chain of Jews were very important. That eventually begins to get torn down as Europe discovers paper money and credit and begins to allow all of the trade that happens after the Crusades. But before that, this was a very important part of Jewish law. But women were still vulnerable, and so the ketubah still remained as a top debt to be handled.
It says she could just sell it on her own on number one.
Mm-hmm.
I thought once the ketubah was damaged, she had to take an oath.
She had to take an oath to the heirs, yes, that she had not done more, but that doesn't stop her from doing it in the first place.
So she just has to switch to the heirs, and then she can go ahead and sell it?
Reverse. If she does it, she has to swear that she didn't do it wrong.
Wow.
Right? You don't take an oath about what you're going to do in this particular type of oath. You take an oath that what you did was honest and correct. Right? So, for example, if I'm the guy watching your sheep, and when I come back, or when you come back, there's like 3 sheep missing, I have to take an oath that I did not take your sheep. Right? I'm taking an oath about the past. I'm not taking an oath about the future in this type of oath. Yep.
For her to sell a land for maintenance, she has to show it, or at least swear or something, that she's not getting the maintenance as required by the previous chapters, right?
That she needs it, yes. That there aren't funds to support her.
All right.
Right. So yes, if she goes to sell it and the heirs say, but what about that pile of gold? Why aren't you using that to buy your food? Then yes, there would be a counterclaim at that under those circumstances.
And if she does have that pile of gold in the corner,
Mm-hmm.
are they entitled to that pile of gold to buy property, and then she just gets the use of it? Like,
You mean they don't have the right to deprive her of that? Now remember, Ketubot generally were not mortgaged against movable property like gold coins. But if there was maintenance, that would have been coming out of that
Right.
that gold.
I mean, like the husband
Right.
gets to buy land with the gold, and she.
No, the heirs do not inherit his right to use her property.
All right.
So, like let's say, for example, back in our case here of this wonderful lady, that let's imagine she had another piece of property that was just hers, right? She owned that before the marriage, and now she owns it after the marriage. While he was alive, then, talked about our trees, right? He would be allowed to sell the fruit and keep the money from the fruit. When he dies, his heirs do not get to keep using her fruit, right? It is entirely her property at that point, because their heirs don't inherit his right to her property unless they're married to her, and that gets a little creepy, which we're going to talk about actually. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Any connection with these laws with the story of Ruth and Naomi?
Kind of. So that is more of the laws of redemption, right? So for Yibum, as well as for families that had to sell their land due to poverty. So in those cases, there should be a redeemer from your land. So it's different because it's not specifically about the women. It was about the land and the husbands that were now dead that were being considered. It was just, well, if you're redeeming the land, you have to know that we also have to do Yibum. We have to do the levirate marriage for Ruth. So if you want the land, you have to take care of her as well. So that's why she got brought into it.
How this works with the 7-year sabbatical
Mhm.
when the land returns to its owner?
Right. So that's all a question of establishing the value of the land in relationship to the sabbatical year. So if it was 1 year before the sabbatical year, the land would be worth less than if it were 6 years before the sabbatical year.
But in that case, will return to her?
Well, no, it only if that was her personal land from her family prior to the marriage.
So if she sells the little parcel that she has with the trees
Right.
at the end of the 7 years, that will return to her.
It depends on how she got the parcel. Right. So if this parcel was part of her ancestors' inheritance that was in her possession because maybe her father died without leaving any boys, then yes, that land would stay with her. Even after she sold it, it would return to her in the sabbatical year.
Okay.
But in the more common case, this land would probably belong to her husband's heirs. And after the sabbatical or jubilee year, it will return to them because they are the official heirs of the land. All right, and then part 3, we get one last little piece.
A divorced woman must not sell her husband's property except with the permission of the court.
Okay, so for a divorced woman, she does actually need to get the permission from the court because he's still alive. So it's a different dynamic than when she is a widow. Make sense? Okay. Yes.
Didn't the commentary say something about embarrassment as being one of the reasons why she doesn't need permission?
Indeed, there's discussion among some of the commentary on this that making her go to the court each time to give permission to sell for her ketubah or permission to sell for her maintenance was embarrassing as a widow. You know, it seems like the estate's not taking care of me, my husband didn't leave me enough, or things like that. But with a divorce, it's not such an issue because, you know, you're not exactly saying that you had the best of relationships because you're divorced now. All right, 11:4.
If a widow whose ketubah was 200 zuz sold land worth a money of 200 zuz or land worth 200 zuz or 1 money, she has received her ketubah.
Okay. Isn't that easy to understand?
Right.
We need a map. Okay, let me make sure I get the numbers in the right order here. Okay, so the widow wants to sell land for her ketubah, and she takes land. All right, there's a piece of land. There's another piece of land. I'm going to want some more colors. Okay, she takes land, and the land was actually worth 200. And the ketubah was 200 zuz, right? So we're looking for 200 as her ketubah, right? That's the amount that the estate owes her, is the 200 for her ketubah, right? Good. So she's got that, and she sells something that's worth 100 for 200. She's got a good real estate agent, right? The land is only worth 100, but she's able to sell it for twice what it's worth.
That's the meaning of money.
Mane means 100. Mane means 100. So she sells something that was worth 100 for 200 zuz, for double the value. Or she takes land that was actually worth 200, and she has someone other than the Tan helping her, but she's only able to get 100 for it. Right? She sells the 200 zuz worth of land, but she only gets half what the real value of the land is. The question is her ketubah complete? Have they executed the ketubah? Has it been paid off? Right? And the answer here is yes. Now, in both cases. Now, why is it okay? Okay, so let me change back. Okay, so you might be thinking, well, wait a minute. Shouldn't it be 200 equals 200, right? Did she get 200 for her ketubah? And the answer in the first one is, well, yes. She did get 200 in the first case. And then the answer in the second one is, well, no, she didn't get 200 in the second one, so that should be a problem. But this is not really the question. The real question is ketubah versus loss to estate, or value loss of the loss to the estate, because it's her ketubah is not about a number. Her ketubah is about the estate value, and so therefore, if she sold it for 200, then she did get what she was supposed to get. Right? So therefore, she has gained with, and this is where it is actually more novel. She can't claim that the estate only lost 100, and therefore it should have to give her more. Because the estate can say, no, we lost a potential 200. Because you got 200 for it, so clearly it was worth more than we thought it was worth, so therefore we're good. But over here, the estate lost a 200 zuzim piece of land. It's not their fault that she got too little for it. The estate did lose that much. Therefore, if she got 100 for it, she got her ketubah, because the amount the estate was yielding was equal to the amount that her ketubah needed. Pretty logical, actually. But you can imagine a lot of arguments over that.
Yes.
And that's why the Mishnah had to spell it out and say, no. If you get what you're supposed to get, either the amount the estate's giving up or the amount that you receive, then you're good. So this is maybe in a way to make up for some of the earlier discussions, trying to say she doesn't always come out on top, right? As long as she gets what she is fairly owed, then the estate has done its job. But in this case, like over here, the estate technically gets off easy because she got her 200 and they lost a less than they needed to lose. And over here, the estate didn't really get off easy at all because they lost the 200 they were expecting to lose. And now she's probably upset that she didn't get as much as she wanted.
What if she waited a little longer and then the property raised again and then she can sell it for 400 and
Well,
then get the 200?
That's always the danger when you sell property is it going to go up or is it going to go down? But you do raise a very good point where if the property was going to be sold for 400,
That was my question.
That's the next one.
then what happens? And that is the next one, exactly. So you were reading ahead, excellent.
So it goes, if her ketubah was 1 money and she sold land worth a money and a dinar for 1 money, her sale is void.
Okay, so it's not exactly our case, but it is going to explain what would deal with this case. So here, again, the difference is between worth and cost, right? The idea here, let me make sure I use the numbers that are in here. She wants to sell a piece of land, and this land is actually worth 101, right? But she sells it, let me just make sure I got
The
this.
ketubah is worth 100.
Sorry, yes, so her ketubah is worth 100. Thank you. That's why I'm not an accountant. Her ketubah is worth 100, and she wants to sell the land, which is worth 101, and she sells it for 100. That's the actual price tag that she sells it for. And the question is there a problem here? And the answer is yes, because the land has been shortchanged to the heir's disadvantage, to the estate's disadvantage, right? I mean, for 1 dinar, it may seem like it's silly, but you can imagine if the land was worth $1 million and she sold it for $500,000, and that was all that she needed, right? Remember, it's not like over here where she's ending up with exactly what she needs, or less than she needs, rather. She's actually getting what she wants. It's the heirs that are getting ripped off because they're losing a portion of the value, the real value of the land. So she may be happy, but the heirs have just been shortchanged. That makes sense? Yes? Then that is void. It canceled and go back to beginning and try again. It's not, you're not allowed to sell it for more, for less than it's actually worth. If you sell it for more than it's actually worth, the heirs keep the bonus, right? So let's imagine that she sells it for 400, but her ketubah is only for 100. She gets her 100, and the heirs get to keep the additional 300.
Right. Even in the 2A says, even if she said that she will return the dinar to the heirs, the sale is still void.
Yes, so go ahead and read that part again. It's not loud. 2A is?
So even if she says, I will return the dinar to the heirs, the sale is still void.
Right. So even in this particular case where she says, I'll keep my 100, but I'll subtract 1, and then I will give that 1 back to you to make up for the missing amount, it is still a void sale. So in Jewish law, if you sell something for less than it is worth, knowingly, it is considered usually to be a void sale. There's actually a whole issue of what's called ona'ah, of exploitation, of either over or undercharging. We're actually going to deal with that very soon.
In the second case is not the same.
This one or this one?
No, the third one.
If she sold
$200 that she received only 100.
this one.
Yeah, because the land was 200. Okay, yes, fine, but when they want to pay her the ketubah, she received only 100, not the 200 of the land.
But she received the land that was worth 200 from which to collect her ketubah. It's not the estate's fault that she got less for it than she should have. So therefore, the estate has done their duty, and they're not responsible for the bad market or her bad real estate agent.
Yeah, because her ketubah was worth 200.
And that's how much the estate gave her
The heirs
of
were not
worth.
penalized.
Of worth, exactly. And the heirs therefore are not being penalized either.
In this case, the heirs will be penalized for 1.
As an extreme example, right? It could also have been, 401,
Yeah.
and she sold it for 100, and then she'd say, okay, I'll give you back the extra. But no, in any case, you're not allowed to sell it knowingly for less than it's actually worth.
Even if let's say Ketubot's 100 and it's worth 150. If she sells it for the 150, the sale's still void because she only had a lien against $100 of the property, right?
Let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. So she has the ketubah that's only worth 1, but she has land that's worth 150, and she sells it for 150. So that wouldn't happen, because what would happen would be is she would sell 3/4 of the land, or 2/3 of the land rather than the 100% of the land, because 2/3 of 150 would be 100. So land was more easily and more often sold in pieces than people think of it nowadays. I mean, nowadays you think of land as being, the real estate has been divided like this. It's registered with the county. It's looking like this shape, and you can't subdivide it however you feel like it. Back in the old days, I could sell, this much land to you, and then sell that much land to you, and as long as we both agreed, that was perfectly fair. So she would simply sell less of the land to make her 100.
Right, but if she did sell more, though, that would be, because that's actually what I thought was going on in Part A. If she did sell more, it would be void, right?
If she sold more of the land than she was entitled to sell, yes, that would be a problem.
The whole thing would be void, right?
Because it's a problem to say, which it's a problem to sell. Now, there's a little bit of a pushback from Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, so let's go ahead and get his objection, and then we'll talk about how that can go. So that's part B of section 2.
Part B. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamaliel says, her sale is always valid unless there was so much land there as to allow her to leave a field of 9 kadim and from a garden in an area of half a kav, or according to Rabbi Akiva, a quarter of a kav.
All right, so these are measures of seed, of how much seed you would plant in that area to grow. It's the 9 kabim, from what I could figure out, is approximately about, let me do the math again, because it's like about what do you call it? 1,500 amot. So that would be about 2,000 or so feet as a cube, or square rather. So yeah, it's about 2,000 feet on a side. So that would be a little bit less than half a mile. So if there's leftover land that could have been turned into farmland rather than too small to be worth it to plow as a farm, then he's saying that's a problem. But if she sells it and she wants to transfer the extra over and all of that, we're not going to quibble. We're not going to be petty about just the little bit of extra land that went here and there. And then if it's a garden, it's a smaller area that we're not going to quibble about, because you can use gardens differently than a farmland. And Rabbi Akiva says even less, but they're marching their way back to the same idea, which is if there's anything left over of value that she has sold that is not being collected or saved for the heirs, then that transaction is a problem. So ultimately, they don't win. This counter argument, it does have to be that what she sells the land for has to be the appropriate value and not more than her ketubah, because her ketubah is the upper limit of the debt. So she has no right to take value for more than the upper limit of her debt, which I think is fair. Okay, part 3.
Part 3, if her ketubah was 400 zuz, and she sold land to 3 persons, to each for 1 money, and the 4th she sold what was worth a money and a dinar for 1 money, the sale to the last person is void, but the sale to the others are valid.
Okay, so it's just giving us a summary that if she has sold a bunch of land and all of the other previous sales were correct and only the last one is a problem, only the last one is a problem. The other 3 purchases continue as normal, and it's the last one that has to be redone to make sure the value and the cost and the value are equal. Good. Okay. 11.5. Now we get back to, wait a minute, who's selling property for twice or half what it's worth? Because that generally is not allowed in other categories. So when we talk about ona'ah, about the overcharging or underpaying, that is generally, by Jewish law, not applicable to property, right? Something that a real estate person would understand. Land is important to the person who wants it. So if I'm willing to pay extra for this piece of property, then that creates a special relationship, which it's worth it legitimately to me, right? There's a value for this pen, a real objective value according to Jewish law, because a pen is a pen is a pen, and it shouldn't be something different for you and you and you. But land, that does have a different feel to it according to Jewish law, and therefore the upper and lower limits on the buying and selling of land is usually more open. However, there's a problem with this, which is to say that she is technically selling land that belongs to the heirs. So how do we square what she does with it with what they are technically owed and what would be allowed under these circumstances?
No, we're talking all the time about land. What happened, for example, cities like Jerusalem,
Yeah.
with all the amount of migration or pilgrimage 3 times a year, there is location. It's like having a house in Jerusalem should be a very high property.
Yes.
So what happened?
And no.
Why not?
Okay, so yes, of course, having a home inside a walled city was a very big deal. Number of Mishnayot before, I don't even remember when it was, so long ago, we talked about how long you had to redeem property that you had sold within a walled city and being able to come back and reclaim that property. Maybe you're absent that time, but yes, cities were considered important. However, as nice as your luxury flat in downtown Jerusalem is, it's not going to feed you. Right? That's not going to put food in your belly, because when there is a war, when there is a drought, when there is a crazy king, people aren't showing up to Jerusalem for anything. They're not renting out your flat for the pilgrimage festivals. You're not getting any value from that property.
You can make trading during the pilgrimage.
You could, but my point is that during the bad times of the year, not as many people would be coming, right? The roads would be closed because of war or bandits or other issues. So the money you could make from your apartment in Jerusalem is not steady, it's not normal. The food you grow in the dirt, that was considered to be what you truly relied upon. And to have no dirt, right, to have no land, meant that you didn't know if you were going to starve next year. Now, yes, if you were very wealthy like the king or one of the other sort of aristocracy, rich people, then yeah, you were generally feeling safe. But even those people, most of their security came because they owned huge amounts of land. So that even if there was a really bad season, they would still have enough to eat. And that was the security that came from having land. For all of us here, think about when Hurricane Dorian was, looking like it was going to push right into Central Florida. What happened to all the tin food in the supermarket? Gone, right? At the first hint, it was gone. Why? Because people suddenly realized, if I don't have enough food for 3, 4, 5, 6 days, I'll die. And how am I going to get the food? I'm not growing it in my backyard. Right? My little suburban house doesn't have a farm out back. But I'm sure that if you lived on a farm, you didn't run out and buy a whole bunch of canned goods, because you probably already had food in your storehouse that you had grown, or food that was ready to be picked, or food that you could eat that was an emergency. You just kill a cow and you can survive for a week. Right? It wouldn't be happy. It wouldn't be good. It would cost you a lot of money to lose those resources, but you would survive more easily than the rest of us city dwellers. So as much as we love being city dwellers now, land still is the foundation of our life, of our security. And if we didn't have Iowa and Kansas out there producing food for the rest of us, we would be terrified every day of the week of where are we going to get food for tomorrow. So land is still important, but even back then, land was much more important than any other commodity or value in your life. That's why when God came to divide up the land among the tribes, it was the land that was divided. It wasn't anything else. He didn't say, oh, you can have gold and you can have silk and you get land. Everybody wanted the land. Right? Gold you can't eat. All right, 11.5.
The assessment of the judge who undervalued by 1/6 or added 1/6, their sale is void.
All right, so if you do go to the judges and you need to get it appraised, like we saw with divorced women or in certain other circumstances, it might also have been done. If they assess it wrong, then somebody's being cheated. Either the heirs are being cheated because it was undervalued, so she's selling more land than she should, or else it was overvalued, and therefore she's selling less than she should and will receive less when she's selling it. But since it was valued, as we talked about over here, she wouldn't have a claim anymore of being able to do it, right? If that was the judge said it's worth 200, but really it's only worth 100, she'd be out of luck. But this is saying, no. If the judge actually valued it and he got it wrong, then there's a reason to complain. Again, for both the heirs or for her.
Why 1/6?
That's just the benchmark for ona'ah, for overcharging in Judaism. Why?
Why 1/6? Why not 1/5?
When we do the babas, we'll deal with that. It's in the babas, the other section of the Mishnah. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon has a different opinion.
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says their sale is valid. If so, how is the power of the court superior?
Okay. Great phrase, makoach beit din. What's the power of the judges then? Right? You're like, wait a minute. We're not talking about Shlomo, the merchant, selling oranges in the shuk. We're talking about the court, the beit din. If the beit din says it's worth 200, the beit din said it's worth 200. And if you try and complain about the beit din's assessment, then you are undercutting the respected authority of the court.
For him, it's always authority.
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel very much is consistent that the authority of the Beit Din matters. And the many stories about him pushing this point in many places. But he was right in a little way, which is to say that if people begin to say the court is not being fair, the court is political, that is very destructive to the society and the community. The court needs to be seen as being impartial. Now, the answer in here was, well, the court will be made impartial because the court can be corrected if they over or underestimate. But let's actually say that courts could make mistakes. And if the court makes a mistake, we need to fix it.
And who will determine whether they over or undercharge?
So then you would have to get other experts to testify that the assessment they had made was incorrect in front of another court. You would have to go through like an appellate kind of process.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Or bring the experts to the court to make the court itself admit that it made a mistake. Again, assuming that the mistake was just an innocent mistake rather than intentional.
Wouldn't the fact that it wasn't selling be evidence of a mistake?
But remember, with property, it could be sold, even at the inflated prices, right? So, but the difficulty would be that it would still be unfair to someone, right? You might be able to make a sale, but someone is being, someone is losing on this misprice.
But it seems like if it's sold at a higher price based on the first Mishnah of this chapter, then it's harmless error because you got your $200.
If it's sold,
So if they valued it at 200 when it's really only 150,
right,
and you sold it for 200, it seems like there's really no remedy because you got your 200.
The potential is that to have the heirs being ripped off because now the land it was not supposed to be worth 400. The Ketubot is worth 100, and she sold it for 400.
If they undervalued it.
But what he's saying is if they said it's worth 200, right, and it was actually only worth 150,
right,
then I'm trying to get exactly what they can.
That's what he was saying, but I'm saying if it's worth 150 and they valued at 200,
right,
and it's sold at 200 anyways, because you said people would overpay.
They might, yeah.
But if they did overpay, then it seems like you'd have no real remedy to complain because what's the remedy?
So
my understanding is that she can only sell it to the price of the Ketubot, not above that.
The widow would only be allowed to handle a deal that was worth that much. But I think what he's saying is that let's imagine her ketubah was 200, right? So therefore she was able to have that. But the problem is if her ketubah was 200, then the court valued it at 200 or valued it at 150?
The court valued at 200,
right,
but it's really only 150, so they overvalued it. And the question was, if it's sold, isn't that proof of the value? And they said somebody paid too much.
Okay, so in that particular case, I think that is probably the one exception where no one except the buyer potentially would be harmed.
Right.
But like we said, within property, the buyer and seller generally are not worried about about overcharging. So that might be the one exception where there's not a catastrophe happening.
Yeah.
Okay, but part two. Nathan, I believe you're still up.
Yes. But if they make a bill of inspection, even if they sold what is worth a money for 200, or what is worth 200 for a money, their sale is.
Okay, so what this is trying to say is if there is a formal official appraisal, which is then revealed to the customer, right? So that the customer knows this is the official statement, and therefore they are buying it as is, would be the modern equivalent. They don't have the right to then complain, you overcharged me or underperformed. So once it's been leveled at that, once it's reached that level of transparency, then you know that what you're buying, there is no remedy if it's wrong. Then in that circumstance, everybody is clear about what's happening. Again, if you all want to disagree about that, then you would have to continue to argue in front of the court to try and get them to change their opinion. All right, we're going to finish 11.6 tonight. Let's fly through. It's not too long, but it's got a lot of terms we'll have to define. I believe you're back up, Aaron. Yeah.
All right. A minor who refused her husband.
Okay, let's make sure we're just going to do these as we go through them. So imagine we have a young girl who was scheduled to get married, and before she gets married, she says, I don't want to marry him, right? She's allowed to do that. I remember women and boys who had their parents arrange a marriage before they were adults. They are allowed to refuse the marriage when they become adults. So she says, nope, I don't want that. Onward.
A secondary incest prohibition.
So the rabbis were very worried that people not only avoid marrying the people specifically outlined in the book of Leviticus, but that they also not marry other people that were similar to those people. So it's like you not only can't marry your daughter, you can't marry your daughter-in-law, right? So they tried to establish additional levels of protection. An additional fence, exactly.
Or an Elonite.
Elonite. So an Ilonite. So an Ilonite is a woman that is technically and clearly infertile. Right? So we're not talking about somebody who is akara, who is infertile sometimes, but we're talking about someone who could not and could not have children. Right? So like, if she knew that she had never had a menstrual cycle, for example, in her entire life before she was married, even though she was clearly an adult and had exhibited all the other signs of reaching puberty. And then it was established that she's not having babies.
Yeah, but you could think that Sarah was one Ilonite and she had it.
Okay, you could think that, exactly. And that's where we're going to get to the second half of this. But if she believed and knew that she couldn't have children, right? That's what we're talking about as this Ilonite. Is she believes and knows that she is infertile. It's a biological thing, not just, maybe, but biologically she can't. In that case, then...
what am I? In that case, is not entitled to a ketubot or to the use effects of her dowry or to maintenance or to worn out articles of her dowry.
Right. Basically, if you get married under the false pretense of thinking you can have children, but you know you can't, then when he divorces you, you don't get it bupkis. Right? You do not get a ketubah. And likewise, if you get married to someone that's your like daughter-in-law that you're not supposed to get married, when the rabbis say, whoa, break it up, you don't get a ketubah. And likewise, a girl who never actually agreed to get married and was originally arranged by her parents, she doesn't get her ketubah back either, because the marriage never went forward. The marriage never happened with her consent. So therefore, the contract wasn't technically with her because she didn't agree to it once she had the option. So in those three cases, they don't have a claim for the ketubah or for any of the other benefits that would go to a wife upon divorce or death.
this happened many times because there was a lot of prearranged marriages.
Yes, but you can imagine if you say, "Hey, I want my son to marry your daughter," and then they grow up and they say, "We don't want to get married." Do you want? Or I would not want your daughter saying, "Now give me my ketubah," and be like, "Wait a minute," but the deal never happened.
Yeah.
So that's why they set
But
this up.
even if they went to marriage,
Oh, if they went to marriage, and that means they both agreed to it. And then if they get divorced, or if she becomes a widow, then she would collect her ketubah, even though it had been arranged prior to them reaching maturity. Once they agree to it by getting married and carrying on with the actual agreement,
that's it.
then it's a regular contract, but just like as if they had done it on their own.
How can you be sure 100% that you are an Ilonit?
Okay.
Because look, in the Tanakh you have many examples. You have Hannah, you have Sarah, you have many that they really were account for many all their life, and suddenly
And you have
Something.
Malka.
Almost all the
never had
imahot.
children.
Right?
So
Almost.
the other one had
no, but
children.
also Hannah, which
I know, like I said, I know it's being infertile is like a necessary requirement to be a famous Jewish woman in the Bible, right? It's like if you're not fertile, you're never going to be successful.
Yeah.
It's like almost all the women who are infertile are women who end up having the amazing impact on the history of our people, and even people who were maybe not infertile explicitly, but had some delay. Like for example, we have the issue of Judah and Tamar and Ruth, right, where they went through a long time where they should have had a kid. You would have thought, because it's not like they had birth control pills, and they didn't. So Ruth probably was. Infertile for a period.
So that's the issue. Like for example, you
Right,
think that you are, but actually you are not, or maybe you're not. So how can you say?
So the rabbis
Okay.
actually looked for physical signs for being an Ilonit. Right? They actually looked not just for a history of not having children, but they looked for physical indications that the person was not developing as a post-pubescent woman. So for example, if she looked like a man, even though she was built like a woman, then they would say this is somebody who's probably never going to have children. But that was the kind of thing that could sometimes be hidden. And then she gets married, and then it's clear that she's not having children. And then the husband says, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? And he brings her to the court, and the court establishes that physically she has the symptoms of being somebody who could never have children. Then she doesn't get a ketubah. Now,
What if she didn't know about that?
Okay, so let's get to the rest. We need more text.
Oh, okay.
Part A.
If from the outset he had married on the understanding that she is an Ilonit, she is entitled to a ketubah.
All right, so if she thinks she is, and she says, hey, I've got these, that, and the other symptoms that make it look like I'm probably never going to be able to have children, and he says, that's okay, then it's okay. And she gets a ketubah if he finally says, all right, you know what, you are infertile, I don't want to be married to you anymore. As long as it was open, as long as it was clear what she thought and what the symptoms were. Now, if there weren't any symptoms and there was no way to know, then yes, then we're talking about just a normal infertile woman.
But if she doesn't know,
Well, that's, as we've talked about before,
yes.
people were not as body shy back then. Remember, I don't remember, were you here that week when we talked about his family going into the bathhouse to check her out while she was naked?
Yeah.
Right? So there would have been, she would have talked with her mother, she would have talked with her grandmother, she would have talked with her father if there were various things about her that were different than other women. That people were not so body shy as to not talk to their family about their body. It would be like, hey, mom, it looks different down here compared to other women.
She doesn't have parents. She's an orphan. Okay, she
Right?
doesn't
So
know.
if it is a case entirely of ignorance, then yes, then she is not punished for it.
So she received the ketubah.
Yeah, but this
Also,
is,
if she's an Ilonit.
yes. If it's absolutely, there's no way for her to have known, right? She was stranded alone on a desert island. She got rescued, and the guy who rescued her married her before they even reached land again, right? Then yes, she would be married on the presumption that she didn't know there was anything wrong. Right?
Okay.
Again, not trying to say, and it's important that this is not trying to say that infertility is wrong. As we've already said, most of the women of note within the Torah and the Tanakh were infertile, and then later often did have children or didn't. And the case here is not about her infertility, it is about deception. It's about being unclear in what she was doing, because even if she was completely and totally physically infertile, if she told him that and they got married anyway, she is entitled to everything else, just like any other marriage.
What about if they got married through intercourse?
The rabbis weren't happy with that in the first place. But again, the whole point would be she had to agree that that's what that intercourse was for. She would still have to be upfront with him about her own biology as she knew it.
And what happens if she thinks that she's become married because of intercourse, but he thinks something different? What happened in that case with the rabbi?
So then you go to the Beit Din, and then you have an argument. And she says, this is what he said, and he says, this is what I said, and the witnesses say, this is what we saw.
Well, this is what you need of the bet.
Yeah.
Like around, hey, let me check what you're doing.
Yeah.
Which kind of witnesses you can have in those situations?
You are so American that you think that people were always completely private about everything. Right? Small villages. People knew what people were doing. And people heard what people were doing. Remember, we talked about, the wife being a screamer as being an issue of bed. Right? And so, and when we look at Soto, you talk all about, people seeing her going alone with this guy and all of that. So, and adultery as a basic principle in Judaism is only established through witnesses. So yeah, there were witnesses to people having sex. And that is just something that was perhaps more common than it is now. But it certainly was something that happened. But we have many more private spaces now than we ever used to. We didn't have as big of houses. We didn't have as big of buildings or synagogues for people to hang out in. Many people spent much of their life outdoors. And some of them did things outdoors that would get other people's attention.
I thought you only had to witness the seclusion.
You're talking about Sota, but that's a little bit more precise. For adultery, to actually know that it's adultery, you need to see the act. Well, otherwise, how can you execute someone for something they might have done? It's a capital crime.
For the adultery, but
for adultery.
Marriage, you only have to witness the seclusion, right?
Different issue, yeah. Okay, let's finish up.
A widow who was married to a high priest,
which she wasn't supposed to be.
A divorced woman, or halutza, who was married to a regular priest.
Also, they're not supposed to get married. Halutza is the woman who was supposed to be in the Levirate marriage, right? She was supposed to get married to someone else. She was married to someone else. They didn't have kids, so she's supposed to marry the brother, and then they reject. But she goes ahead and gets married anyway, right? To a priest, also not supposed to be allowed. Onward.
A mamzereth, or a natina.
A mamzeret. That's a mamzer, but a feminine version, right? So mamzer is somebody who was born from a forbidden relationship, born from incest or born from adultery, for example.
Or a natina, who was married to an Israelite, or the daughter of an Israelite, who was married to a natin or a mamzer.
Natin or mamzer.
Natin or mamzer is entitled to a ketubot.
All right, so if I remember correctly, the natina or the natin is somebody that came in the very rare case of the tribe of Gibeon, if I'm not mistaken, that made a peace treaty with Joshua under false pretenses. And he said, okay, fine, we're not going to kill you, even though you're Canaanites, but now you're going to be relegated to sort of second-class citizens. So this was a subclass within the ancient world. It's not a common situation. All of these are people that are not supposed to marry regular Israelites, right? Or marry the priests if they were of that special circumstance. But if they do get married, they are treated as being married. And therefore, they get the ketubah and they get the normal treatment that a regular wife would get. So even though the marriage itself was not a marriage they were supposed to have, the divorce or the widowhood would come with the regular treatment that would be done.
So post the fact that you legalize everything.
Well, kind of, yeah. I mean, there were often problems of these things. So, for example, you marry a mamzeret, your children are going to be mamzerim. Right? They're going to continue to have that status. If a Kohen marries someone they're not supposed to, they're not allowed to continue to work in the temple and in the sacred precincts. And the children born will not have the same level of sanctity. So there were consequences to these things. It wasn't as though it was like, oh, okay, you got away with it. But in these particular cases as well, there would be a ketubah as part of the dissolution of the marriage.
So what happened on Cohen that they kick them out of the service and he doesn't have land?
So yeah, then he would have to get a job. He would get a job. Go be a day laborer. Right? Go do some other job. Go be a potter. But yeah, he wouldn't be collecting his priestly stipend.
When they came from Babylon,
Yes, back, right.
and it was an issue with they were marrying women.
The foreign women, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The rabbis told them, it was not rabbi, but they told them that they need to divorce them and send them back.
Correct. Yes, exactly.
They had
So during the time of Ezra,
yeah,
they told everybody to divorce the women they had married that were idolaters.
Mm-hmm.
And no, there wouldn't have been a ketubah in that because Jewish law has a jurisdiction. It only covers Jewish people. Right? So technically a marriage to a non-Jewish person isn't a marriage under Jewish law. Right? It might be a marriage according to American law, and it might be a marriage according to the two people who are involved in it. But Jewish law stops at the edge of Jewish people. Right? I can't put my law on somebody who's not Jewish. Right? The Torah only works for people in the covenant who are in part of the Brit. So if somebody's not Jewish, Jewish law doesn't cover them, and doesn't cover them for good, and also doesn't cover them for bad. Right? I'm not going to tell them that it's wrong for them to eat bacon. If you're not Jewish, you can eat all the bacon you want. The Torah doesn't cover you for that restriction.
But if they live between you, that makes a problem.
Of course, there was a huge problem at that time.
They can break whatever they want, and also it's a very important situation.
So criminal law, criminal law was always still handled as one law between you, and business law was handled one law between you. So if you're buying and selling, I would still be protected even if I wasn't Jewish in that commercial transaction. Yeah, criminal and civil law was the same, but relationship law could not extend, and of course ritual law didn't extend.
So this woman never converted.
Correct. In the situation with Ezra that you're talking about, the women were idolaters. Yeah, they weren't foreign like they came with a different passport. They were foreign in the sense that they were doing avodah zarah, foreign worship. They were worshiping idols.
So they were sent back.
No, they weren't sent back because the people who had married the idolaters were the people who stayed in Israel. The people who came from Babylon had actually stayed only with the other Jewish people. The people who remained in Israel, who were usually the poor that were not taken when Nebuchadnezzar first conquered, and then Nebuchadnezzar brought more people from other parts of his empire and put them into Israel. It was those people that he brought in that married the Israelites who had stayed, and everything got confused. And then when Ezra came back, he said, "Whoa, what are you guys doing?" Right? No. We're Jewish, right? So you've got to be a Jewish family. Well, okay, all right, but it was a big problem. Yeah. Okay, that's it for tonight. We do not have class next Wednesday because we're going to be recovering from high holidays. And then we don't have class the following Wednesday because it is high holidays, Yom Kippur. So it will be, I guess, 3 weeks before we get to continue for the last couple chapters of Ketubot.
I don't think about the next one.
I always take suggestions. If people have another Masechet, another section that they would like to do, let me know. We could do another one of the Babas. We haven't done one for a while. I have to double check which ones we've done. I know we did Baba Metzia.
We did two.
We did Baba Kama?
Yeah,
I think we haven't done Baba Batra. Yeah. So that would be another option, which is more like business law. So there are options. If you have any ideas that you would like to propose to the group, let me know.
I'm sorry, Rabbi. Are we having or are